Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back into the Buster Show podcast. On today's episode, we have a Hall of Famer, and that's because we have Mike Breen on the show. Mike, how are you?
I'm great, Buster. It's real nice to meet you, and I've been looking forward to it. Thank you.
Now, I'm sure, getting introduced as a Hall of Famer doesn't get old, but how was that whole experience? And now, it's sort of like the sports equivalent of winning an Oscar. It's tied to you for the rest of your life.
Well, it was truly incredible, and the best part about it was being able to share it with all the people that were responsible. I've been blessed in so many ways beyond what I deserve, Buster, and there's so many people in my personal life and then in my career who all played such an integral part of any kind of success I've had. So for me, the favorite part was being able to thank all those people and be able to share it with so many people. And then the particular Hall of Fame weekend, to have my family, my wife and my children, my mother who's 89, who's probably watched more Knicks games over the past 30 years than anybody, and my brothers, and it was just it was a special weekend to share with my family, and again to be able to thank all the people that are responsible for me being there.
Ah, that's amazing. It's true. Very rarely in life do you get an opportunity just to thank people on a public stage like that. So that's one of the most incredible parts that people probably don't think too much about. It's not like in a post-game press conference, athletes are able to thank their families in a non-tired fashion because guys are worn out or whatever. So that's awesome.
Yeah, no, it's hard because they give you a time limit, and
Oh, yeah.
there wasn't enough time to thank all the people. In fact, I even said in the speech, I wish I could have brought everybody up on the stage with me, but there's not a stage big enough in the world to hold that many people. So ones that I wasn't able to thank in the speech, I made sure I thanked in other ways.
Well, that's very kind. I wanted to ask you, I heard, the famous Mike Breen bang call. I heard you came up with it while you were at Fordham. Did this come from a late night brainstorming session, or was it just something that you blurted out one time? How did that come about back then?
No brainstorming. When I was at Fordham, obviously I joined the college radio station, and I do a bunch of games, but a lot of the games, because you evened it out with the different other broadcasters, student broadcasters. So the games that I didn't do, I always went to. Obviously, I'm crazy about basketball. Fordham was my team, so there was about 7 or 8 of us that would go to every single game, not just the home games, the road games. I mean, because Fordham played Manhattan, Fairfield, LaSalle,
Right.
a lot of them on the East Coast. We even drove to the Notre Dame game, which is a story in itself. But it was our just way of banding together and rooting for our team. So I'd be in the stands for most of the games. And when a Fordham player hit a big shot, it just came to me. I just started yelling out "bang" when it was a big shot. It didn't necessarily have to be a 3-pointer. And, it just got me fired up as a fan. And I tried it on the air a couple of times on the radio at the Fordham station, WFEV, and it didn't seem right to me. I don't know. Maybe you have to count it good. You have to say good before you say bang. And so I kind of shelved it for a while. I just kept yelling it in the stands. But then when I started doing television several years later on some Sports Channel America telecasts, high school games of the week, and that they're on TV, I thought it was a cool way of making a big play as concise as possible. And that's the whole key to it, Buster, is, when the crowd is going crazy and you make a call, most people's voices can't stand being at that high intensity level for a long time. The shorter the call, I always think, the more effective. And what's shorter than a 1-syllable word? So I kind of liked the way it sounded then, and some people told me they thought it sounded good, so I stuck with it.
Now, how do you determine what deserves a bang? Because you can't be giving out bangs in the first quarter. Like, you have to choose who deserves that award, right? But I've heard you do one thing where if it's a beginning of the fourth quarter bang, it'll be like a bang, a little bit longer. And then if it's later in the game, it'll be a even shorter, higher pitch bang. So there are different levels of bangs. How do you determine what deserves it?
Well, it's interesting you asked that because there is some thought that goes into that. I don't want to overuse it. To me, if I started using it all the time, it would wear out its welcome very quickly.
Of course.
I don't want to, every once in a while, I'll say it in the first half. If a team goes on like this incredible, 20-2, 22-0 run, or a player hits like 5 threes in a row, even in the first quarter, and just the momentum and the crowd is fired up, it feels right to do it. It wouldn't be the high intensity one like a game winner, but I think the momentum of either a player or a team just doing incredible things sometimes brings that up. As for late in the game, I try not to use it more than I don't think I've ever done it more than 3 times in a game. My preference is maybe 1 or 2. But there are some games now with this incredible shooting from today's NBA players that there's so many big 3-pointers in a fourth quarter that I'm tempted to use it more. So sometimes it's really hard to hold back because I want to use it. But then if there's in the final minute, and depending on who's playing in the game, like if it's a Steph Curry game or a James Harden game, and these guys are knocking down threes from all over, you want to save it for the really big basket of the game and potentially game winner. So sometimes I'll hold on to it, and then a 3-pointer won't happen down the end, and I never wind up using it. So I've got to kind of, sometimes I make the right decisions and I'll make the wrong decisions, and I'm just hoping that I make the right ones on this particular night.
But that does answer my question. So there are bronze, silver, and gold level hangs. That's how it works.
An Olympic year. That's a good way to put it. I like that.
Now, are there any games or players that you particularly look forward to calling, separate from the Knicks, obviously? Do you have a Steph Curry game circled on your calendar? How do you look forward, when you get your full slate of season games at the start of the season, I imagine?
Yeah, you know what, Buster? It's there's so many great players, veterans who I love to play, I love to watch, young players that there's not usually one more than another. Clearly, I love watching Steph Curry play. He's just magical to watch. But I love Kevin Durant. I love LeBron James. I love these veterans that, are in so many big games and see how they perform in the highest level. But I have to tell you, like, for example, this year's finals was as fun a finals as I've had. It ranks right up there with one of my all-time favorites because you had new faces who were now on the biggest stage. So to see Devin Booker, the way he was able to play, see some of these younger players like Cam Johnson, and then with Milwaukee to see Drew Holiday, who's always been one of my favorite players, to see what he was able to do on the brightest stage and in the biggest pressure games. And then, of course, somebody like Giannis Antetokounmpo, who it's sometimes he's hard to be objective about because he's such a remarkable young man. His perspective on his career and on life and knowing about where he came from and where he is now. He's truly a young man that I really admire. So to see him play in the finals. So there's not really one or two that you like more than other. Every time I go to a game, I just hope that it's a game decided in the final seconds. That's my only wish. There are some players I certainly perform well, but that's my wish, is that the fans watching at home are going to be as excited about this thrilling game as me.
That's great. And yeah, this finals was incredible. Like you said, Giannis is one of those new age superstars that everybody can respect and kids can look up to. And, it's pretty remarkable this year as well, just the international success, MVP international, finals MVP international, the cover of NBA 2K, Luka Doncic international. I don't know if that's ever happened before where those 3 categories were filled by, somebody like that. So it's cool to see people from all over the world now having like these really good humans to look up to. So
yeah, it's I started doing the Olympics back in '96, and I did 4 summer games, and it was my first real entry into international basketball. And I remember every Olympics being blown away by how good these players who I'd never heard of,
right,
from Lithuania and Argentina. So to watch these players and see how there really has the gap used to be. The United States was so much better. The gap is so narrowed, as we see now with Team USA losing sometimes and sometimes not even getting the gold, although it was really fun to watch this team bounce back after those losses. but the skill of the international player, and now the toughness and savvy of the international player. They always had the skill, but I remember it was always, yeah, he's not tough enough to play in the NBA.
Right.
That is over and done with. They're as tough and as savvy as anybody in American basketball now, and it's great for the sport.
Totally. Now, I want to ask you this. If you could go back and broadcast any basketball game dating back to the beginning of the NBA, what game would you choose and why? Would you go back and do Wilt's 100? What would you want to go broadcast?
Wow. Well, that's a great question. I've never been asked that. I mean,
maybe a Jordan game, a Jordan finals game. Where does your head go?
Well, from a Knicks standpoint, growing up a New Yorker, growing up a Knicks fan, Game 7 of the 1970 finals, the Willis Reed game, when Marv yelled at Willis. Even though that was a blowout, it was such a special moment in New York sports. I've lived in New York my whole life, so that would have been pretty cool. I think it's funny, we were doing the Phoenix Suns and their finals appearance, first time in a long time. That Phoenix Suns Boston Celtics game, where Gar Hurd hit the shot. Games like that, I think, would be thrilling. Larry Bird stole the ball. Havlicek stole the ball, a couple of those Boston Celtics ones. Now, I'm going to have to give this some thought, come up with a good one. I've never been asked that, and it's a good question because there's so many historic games over time that I've got to come up with one.
For me, it would have to be Wilt's 100 because there's such little documentation about it. To be able to go back and just theoretically, let's assume all these games are televised, right? If there was a televised, well-broadcasted version of that game, it would be insane. That stuff does. Some people out there, conspiracy theorists, don't believe that it happened.
Right.
It's crazy.
Yeah, and it's imagine social media and Twitter going crazy with, well, Wilt's got 82, when he's in the third quarter or however many he had at a particular point, everybody would be tuning in. And that's one of the beautiful things about Twitter. And there are certainly some non-beautiful things.
Right.
But sports fan were being alerted if something really wonderful is going on in the sports world that you're not aware of. You quickly find out, if a guy's having a no-hitter now during the baseball season, all of a sudden you can tune in and because everybody knows about it. But the Wilt Chamberlain game would obviously be one of those that were up there.
That's got to be a difficult thing to call, broadcast a perfect game or a no-hitter, especially because as the game goes on, you both want to talk about it, don't want to talk about it, but as well, there's so much pressure on you because it's one of those things as a broadcaster where and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like generally you only notice the broadcaster, you just expect them to be great and you only notice when they're bad. So for a perfect game or something like that, you have that one moment, one chance that is coming to get that perfectly. How does somebody even stay calm in a moment like that? That's what I'm wondering.
Well, Buster, that's what we live for in those big moments, to have that iconic game, that iconic performance. And you just get so wrapped up into the game. And, as long as you're prepared going into the game, that's the whole key. Then you can just worry about, calling the action that's in front of you. And you do have to maintain your poise. And at the same time, that's something that comes with repetition. If I come back and watch my first year doing NBA games on television, I know the first year, the first really close game, I was probably screaming my fool head off, hyperventilating, made mistakes. And then by the time you do it 4 or 5 times, then you kind of feel a little bit better. Same thing, the first time I did a playoff game, that was a close game at the end. The adrenaline was flowing so much, I didn't know how to control it. But by the time you do 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 of those, you get a better feel, you gain a little more confidence. And the same thing with the finals. I mean, whenever there's a finals game that's going down to the wire, and we had a couple of them this year, I have to remind myself, okay, just stay with the game, stay with the flow, because, I love the sport so much and I love the game so much that it's easy to get so hyped up, and you've got to make sure you maintain your poise. But I didn't always maintain my poise. Like anything, practice, and the repetitions may be better. I'm certainly a lot better calling a close big time playoff game than I was 15 and 20 years ago. And
Of course.
it's the point where, like I said, you can't wait for those games. You live for those type of games.
One thing I've been dying to ask you, losing your voice as a broadcaster, how do you try to avoid that? Or is that just something as well that comes with time, especially if you're doing, let's say, multiple games in a single day, which I know you don't do anymore, but I'm sure you did back in the day. How do you not lose your voice? Because there's this, one of the things that I do is I do the play-by-play for this basketball league. It's called the Crew League, and it's rappers playing against each other. We record the whole tournament in 2 days, 4 games a day, sometimes 5. And I'm dead by the end of the day. What would your best advice be for somebody who's trying not to lose their voice while broadcasting these games?
Well, if you're doing a lot and you're doing a lot of games where you have your high intensity level up, it's going to be hard not to. I mean, I've been fortunate that I haven't had too many issues over the years. Every once in a while you get a bad cold or you get a sore throat and you kind of struggle through a game or two. But I think for the most part, I've been okay. My big thing is I drink tea with honey all the time. Honey is really good for.
That's the trick.
Big. I actually had an issue a couple of years ago, and I had to go see a throat specialist where my vocal cords, the acid reflux was getting up to my vocal cords, and he taught me a couple of things to do. And one of those was not just put honey in tea, but just eat the honey right out of the bottle, which is not the most pleasurable thing to eat, but it worked. And the other thing is when you're not broadcasting, just don't raise your voice that often. I love music. So if I'm in the car, I'm singing my head off, and I have to sometimes cut back on that a little bit. The other thing is, if you ever notice when you're on the phone, you tend to talk louder on the phone. And if my voice is feeling a little weak or a little thin, I won't stay on the phone as much. So there's a lot of different things we do, but my number one thing that has helped me throughout is tea with honey.
Interesting. Now, I've heard that guys like LeBron will read before games in their locker room. Some guys will meditate. Some guys will eat or do other things. Right? How do you prepare for a big game in terms of once the prep work is already done? That time in between when the prep is done and the game is starting. What does that time look like for you before a big game, let's say?
Well, I like my favorite thing about the job is obviously, being able to watch these remarkable athletes play at this incredible level. But my favorite part is all the relationships and the friendships that you make. So if I'm in an arena and I've got all my work done, and that's critical. And that's what I tell young broadcasters all the time. If you have all your preparation done when you go sit down, it's the most wonderful, secure feeling, because now all you're going to do is you're going to call the game. If you try to take shortcuts on your preparation, didn't do as much, like you're thinking in the back of your head, like, oh, okay, maybe I'm not as prepared. I hope this doesn't happen. I hope that. That's the worst way to go in. So if I have all my preparation done I like to talk to people just around either the table, either my analysts, the people who work, our stage managers, statisticians, people in the arena, friends that, like for example, at Knicks games, I've been doing it so long there that season ticket holders you get to know really well. So right. It's just talking about the game and taking it in a little bit. So that's kind of my favorite part of it, is just soaking in the atmosphere. Especially for me to be doing games at Madison Square Garden, even though I've been doing it a long time, it's still sometimes surreal to me. It's still the greatest atmosphere for a big event, in my opinion, in pro sports. I know I'm not objective because I'm a lifetime New Yorker, but sometimes you just need to sit back and look around. I'm like, wow, I'm sitting here courtside at Madison Square Garden calling a game.
I know. If you had to pay for every seat, I mean, it's like $40 million in tickets over the years that you broadcasted the game.
On higher too.
Probably. So the fact, I mean, it's the most incredible thing ever. You figured it out.
Like I said at the top, I'm blessed way beyond what I deserve.
No, that's amazing. Now, what does your in front of you look like? What do you need in front of you? I know you've got your your honey and the tea on one side. You've probably got a box score, I imagine, maybe a TV, probably someone in your ear. But apart from those things, what do you need to have in front of you?
Well, yeah, one of the great things with the NBA is you have the stat monitor in front of you that has everything. Now, I also have a statistician. Dave Freed has been my statistician for 30 years.
Wow.
He's just a partner. I'm not as good if he's not sitting next to me. He's that good. He knows what I like in terms of numbers. He knows what I'm looking for. So I need him next to me. I need the stat monitor to give me all the numbers that I need. But I tend to over prepare. I have charts for every team that I do, and it has some biographical information. It has some personal information. It has some statistical information. And then with index cards, I update each team and how they're doing. So I have a lot of stuff in front of me. And that stuff I think is important, because the way I go into it, if there are 15 players on each team, and now the rosters are there are 13 active players per game. If any of those players have their career game that night, and sometimes it's that 13th guy in a blowout goes in the last 5 minutes.
Jeremy Lin.
Right. Stuff like that. You never know. I want to make sure I can tell every single player's story if they have that career game that night. And that's important in the preparation. And even if it means, they just signed a guy to a 10-day contract 2 hours before the game, he might not play, but I better have a whole slew of info on him in case he does play and goes off in the last 5 minutes with his team down 25. So that stuff's really important for me to have all that there. With that said, though, Buster, and Dick Stockton is one of my broadcasting idols. He told me this a long time ago. We were sitting down, we were doing a game, and I've got all these notes. I mean, over prepared. And he's got some notes, but not nearly as much. And he comes over and he says to me, "That's great." He says that you got all that stuff. He says, "But just remember, the number one thing that matters, it's what's out there on the court." He goes, "You can use that stuff, but what's out there on the court will determine what you're going to use." And it was so good. Like, there could be a player that I have 4 really good nuggets, so either a statistical nugget or a nugget about, and I want to get that in. But the guy gets 3 fouls in the first 2 minutes of the game, and he's a non-factor. I'm not gonna jam that story in,
right.
Do with the game. And that's what he taught me a long time ago. And it was a great lesson about let the game dictate all the information you have in front of you in terms of what you're going to use.
That's great. Now, speaking of broadcasting idols, I know you've looked up to Marv Albert and Vin Scully and guys like that, but I'm sure a lot of people in the NBA space talk about who's on like the Mount Rushmore of players. Who's on your Mount Rushmore of broadcasters, your personal list of those guys that you look up to?
I don't mean this as a cop out, but there's too many to say. I'm from a family of 6 boys, so I've been watching sports on television since I was just a little kid, and 3 of the brothers are older brothers, so I did whatever they did and watched whatever they did. And my dad introduced us to sports, so I've watched from way back to I loved Kurt Gowdy and Pat Summerall, and obviously Marv being in New York was so instrumental in me, and the influence that he had, and the way he broadcast made me want to go into it. But then also I was a huge Met fan, so Bob Murphy and Ralph Kiner and Lindsey Nelson were the Met announcers on TV. So they had a tremendous influence. So there's so many. I mean, today, whether it's Bob Costas or Jim Nance or Al Michaels or Joe Buck, the talent level right now, and guys in my era, I know I'm gonna come up short in terms of not naming everybody I should, but I will tell you that 2 men that I really admire because of the way they conveyed warmth through the television. And that's a hard thing to do. You can be good and do everything right, but to convey warmth through the television with people sitting at home thinking, boy, what a wonderful guy that is. 2 of my favorites in that aspect were Dick Enberg, who just seemed like the kindest man when he called a game, and Vern Lundquist. I loved Vern Lundquist because he just seemed like this warm and friendly guy who loved sports and knew how to call a game and knew how to bring in his partner. So those are 2 of my favorites as well. But there's so many great broadcasters out there right now, and there's so many terrific young broadcasters out there too, Buster, that I'm blown away by some of the talent of some of these young people.
That's amazing. Now, like speaking of when you started out at Fordham to now, how the equipment and tech has changed. I wanted to ask you about that. How different was the tech and equipment for the first Knicks game you broadcasted compared to now? Like what is the difference in actual things that you have?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. You don't really, when you're doing the games on television, you don't notice that as much. All I know now is the sound in your ears are so much more crisp. They're so much better. The sound quality, the microphones are just off the charts in terms of how it sounds in your ears and how it sounds over the television. The biggest change, obviously, from when we started doing games to now is the internet. I mean, that's changed everything. And I remember when I first started doing Knicks games, the first thing you do when you get off the plane, you'd go into the airport at the local newsstand and you'd buy a newspaper to look up stories in the local newspaper, because that's how you got some news that are able to, once you got to the arena, ask the right questions. Now I could spend 10 hours reading stories on a given name on any given night. Personal stories about players, all the stories about the teams. It's almost to the point it's oversaturation for a broadcaster, because you don't want to just load yourself up with all this stuff and then forget about what's important to get in front of you. So that's been the biggest change since I started, is that there's so much information. I think you have to have the ability to edit where what's important and what's not so important, because there's too many things out there that you can use and would be effective if you used it, but you have to cut it down at some point.
Totally. No, it's true as well. And every player is now their own media brand, because they have social, and half these guys have their own media companies. There's so much that the players themselves are putting out, which is amazing for the NBA. And I think the huge reason why it's grown so much is because the NBA supports them in doing that, unlike some other leagues. But that is a whole nother angle in terms of prep. Do you look at guys' social medias, in preparation as well?
Yeah, you have to. I have a Twitter account. I don't tweet. I don't have my name on it. So it's just
a burner.
Covering the league. And I don't know how I could cover the league without it. I follow so many writers. There's so many gifted writers now in the NBA who are doing some incredible work. So I follow them, and then I follow a lot of the players. But I hold it at Twitter. I don't go to Instagram. I leave it up to my daughter and my sons to tell me when something on Instagram is needed for me to take a peek at. But Twitter
smart.
Change my way that I prepare. There's no question about that.
Now, this is something I've always wondered. You're a lifelong Knicks fan. You broadcast the Knicks, but in your head, or are you supposed to be broadcasting for both the Knicks fans and the opposing fans, or are you just broadcasting for Knicks fans? Because I, as a fan, separate from enjoying to broadcast, I sometimes think, why don't the home announcers go, dang it, when they hit a game-winning shot? Right? But that never happens. You just have to call it like it is. Why is that? And is that something that you think about?
Well, there's obviously a big difference when I do a Knicks game for ESPN and when I do a Knicks game for MSG. ESPN games, you got to play it straight down the middle and appeal to both fans and appeal to the overall fan. But when I do a Knicks game on MSG, the majority of fans are Knicks fans. So I believe you have to gear the telecast towards the Knicks. And I think if anybody watches the MSG telecast, it's clear that I want the Knicks to win in those games. But again, growing up listening to Marv, Marv was the Knicks announcer, but when the Knicks were bad, he said they were bad. When a player did something wrong on the Knicks, he said it. And that's a tradition we've tried to continue all along. I mean, my style is obviously a little different than Marv's, but he set this standard for how Knicks telecasts have been. And I think it's the right way, because I think Knicks fans, that's what they want. They don't want to be told how great the team is. They want to be told how you really feel the team is playing. Now, there might be some Knicks fans that might think that I'm too hard on them at times, but I think the majority of Knicks fans want that. They want you to tell them candidly how the team is playing. That's not like that in every market, Buster. And I have, I'm not passing judgment on any of the broadcasters, but in some markets, the fans there, they want more of a homer call. And homer is kind of a negative term to use for a broadcaster. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think it's up what your audience wants. And there are certain markets that they want their home team announcers to be more rooting on the air. And that's okay. And sometimes that's part of the charm of that particular broadcaster. So a lot depends on the market. And my feeling has always been in New York, they want you to tell the truth. Now, on the other occasion, I did learn a really interesting lesson one time. The Knicks were on one of those stretches where they were just bad, really bad. Right. And I felt like I was killing them over again, to the point where I felt like I was a parent scolding my kids. And I walked out of the Garden one night, and a young man, I was going to say he's probably about 30, was dressed in a suit. He comes up to me and he says, why do you hate the Knicks? And I looked at him, I said, hate the Knicks? I said, I've been a Knicks fan since I was 5 years old. I love the Knicks. He goes, but you crush them every night. And I said to him, well, they've been terrible. You want me to say they're playing well when they're playing terrible? He goes, no. He goes, I watch every night. Almost every night I'm watching them. He goes, and I know they're terrible, but you don't have to hit me over the head with it every possession. And I thought that was such an interesting observation from somebody who watches all the time, right? That fans know the team is bad when they're bad, but they're tuning in for other reasons. They're tuning in because maybe that rookie who's starting to show signs of improvement, they want to hear about him. They want to hear about, another guy who's just got back from an injury and he's starting to play a little bit better. And it really told me or taught me that you've got to be very mindful of the viewer. Who are the people watching at home? And if it's Knicks fans who are still watching in a game in April when the team is 25 games under 500, you have to think about them. Why are they watching? They're not watching for you to kill them all the time. You can't make it up. You still have to say they're playing poorly, but there are other things to center on. And it was a great lesson from a viewer who I just happened to meet outside the Garden.
That is great. No, it's true. People watch the games for so many different reasons, whether they're just a fan, which is a lot of people, or they're betting on the game, or they're friends with a player, or, there are a billion reasons that you could think of why somebody would tune into the game. So to sort of, from a broadcasting standpoint, for you to think about how do I, make everybody in all these different people allow them to enjoy it, but comprehend it, but depending on the network, appeal to that audience. It's an interesting thing to think about that most people probably don't.
It's exactly it. And sometimes you even there are team fans watching at home who are rooting for the other team. So you can't neglect the opponent, the Knicks opponent. You got to talk about them and why they're good and why this player is good, and tell interesting information about the other player too. So it's finding that balance. And again, like anything, it takes a while to kind of get a formula that you feel comfortable with and think is the right thing. And hopefully you're making the right decisions for the viewer's sake.
Now, do you ever do this? Because I've been wondering, are you ever walking around the house and you're doing some activity and you just start calling it how it is? Like you're throwing paper in the trash can in your kitchen, and then you just go bang when you get it in. That doesn't happen?
No, I do too many games a year.
Doesn't happen. Got it. Just wanted to check.
Yeah, no, that one I'll stay away from. I do get people, and I'm to me, I'm so flattered when anybody ever asks me to take a selfie with them. I just, I so appreciate the fan support and when they're also nice. But people now, they put up their phones and they want me to yell bang into the phone. So that's hard to say no to sometimes. So I usually say to them, all right, you got to hit a 3-pointer. You hit a 3-pointer, I'll say bang, but you got to hit a 3-pointer.
That's a good excuse.
You got any? Let me know.
I'll definitely think. I'm sure some people will think about some in the comments. I wanted to ask, I know you probably don't have any favorite game. So I just wanted to ask you about a few of my favorites that you've called, starting with Carmelo Anthony's 62-point game. I was actually in the building for that game. I was 13 years old. That's my favorite Knick game that I've ever been to. What was that like broadcasting that? Because that's one of those nights where, they were playing the then Bobcats, who were terrible, on like a Thursday or Friday night. And, it wasn't the hottest game, in the NBA that night, but it, turned into something incredible. What do you remember anything about that night?
Well, he was always capable of going on one of those stretches where he was unstoppable. He's one of the most gifted offensive players in my years broadcasting, just so gifted offensively. And there were so many nights where you thought he was going to go off and have a game like that. And this one, it was clear from the beginning that he was going to do something special. And then when you start thinking about the chance for the record, that's one of those games that you live to call, because you have a chance to witness history. And that's one of the things about the business that makes it so much fun. Even when the Knicks were bad, you just don't know from one night to the next. Are you going to see history? You might see the most incredible performance from an individual or a team. And then you start thinking about all the great players that played for the Knicks and never achieved what he achieved that night. So it gives you a chance to go back and talk about who were the top guys who did the scoring. You start talking about Bernard King again. Bernard King he was an assassin offensively.
Right.
That's the part that I
all those guys,
because it gives you a chance to introduce to the younger fans who maybe didn't hear of Bernard King. This was a special offensive player. And Carmelo Anthony, when he came to New York, obviously there was hope for more success from the team. That never happened. But I really grew to admire and respect him as a man, because he never failed to answer the questions after every game, whether he played well and the team won or whether he played poorly and the team lost. He always stood there and answered every question professionally, thoughtful. So I was so glad for him to have a moment like that, because he didn't have as many moments like that as we thought he was going to have at the Garden. But he had it that night, and he deserved it. By the way, he carried himself during his time there.
I remember when because he hit a half court shot to end the first half. People next to me were saying like, "Oh, he's going for 100." That was the energy there that night, because he had 37 in the first half. Who knows what could happen? Is that the same excitement that you had at halftime during that game?
Oh, sure. And again, it was not a great year for them, but it's still in that building, when there's a special performance going on, there's no building like it. And again, I'm not objective, but Knick fans they're a special breed. I think they're the greatest fans in the world. And they pick up early on what might be a special night, whether it's a Knick player or whether it's an opponent. And everybody, as you said, with the way he played in that first half, everybody picked up on that we have a chance to watch history tonight.
And thank goodness a Knick holds the record, because it would be so depressing if like LeBron had the MSG record,
Well, the way offense is now in the NBA, it might not hold for a while. Although with our new head coach, defense is at a premium, so hopefully he'll be able to make it doesn't happen.
That's true. All right, next game I want to ask you about, Western Conference first round, Lakers versus Suns, Kobe Bryant overtime game winner. What do you remember from the end of that game?
I remember the whole game, because the Lakers they weren't, if I recall that year, they had a couple of rough seasons. And now they're back in the playoffs again. They missed the playoffs a couple of times. And, Phoenix was a terrific team. And that was one of those exciting teams to watch. But any game he played, I don't have any specific remembrances of the game prior to that. But any game he played that was down the end, I loved watching him, the way he handled down the end, because he always clearly wanted the ball. And he was one that he was not, he's like all the great players will tell you, you can't be afraid to fail. And he was never afraid to fail. And he found a way all the time. And I do remember UB Brown saying to me during one of the timeouts right before that about, all right, now we're going to watch him go to work. And he just had that magical way about him. And that was one of those, hits the shot, bang, shut up, let the crowd take over. Those are my favorites. When the crowd takes over a call of a big play, there's no feeling like it as a fan. There's no feeling like it as a broadcaster, where you just lay out and let the joy of the fans and the joy of the player hit the shot take over.
It's true. And I wonder, is that something that, you learned as the more you broadcasted, how important silence was? Because a lot of people just try to fill up every second of airtime because, if in the wrong seconds, it can be super awkward, but you have to know when to allow that silence, or in that case, crowd noise.
Laying out is a strength of any broadcaster. I think you have to do it. And when the crowds weren't there, Buster, it was so weird, and I felt I wasn't as good. I didn't realize how much the crowd played a role in how I announce a game, because I tried to use the crowd a lot in big moments. And when they weren't there during the pandemic, and certainly in the bubble,
yeah,
it just felt so strange, because it's like a great song that you have the lyrics, but there's no music accompaniment. You need that music accompaniment. What makes it so beautiful. And I really think there's a lot of guys that use that now, and I think it's important. Joe Buck is a master at that. He knows exactly when to lay out, let the crowd take over, and it takes a comfort level. You have to have a confidence level as a broadcaster, knowing, you know what, even though I'm paid to talk, the best thing I can do now is to shut my mouth and let the crowd take over.
It's good. Next game I want to ask you about: Spurs Heat, Ray Allen 3. I don't know if you think this, but I feel like that's your word for word most well-known call. I'm sure people in Miami have that tattooed on their arm, right? Bosh gets the rebound from a LeBron miss, gives it to Allen, game 6 of the finals. I mean, that call, because it wasn't just a bang, it was a full sentence leading up to a bang where you didn't, it was live, you didn't know what was going to happen. What do you remember from that exact call? And do you agree that that's your most well-known call?
It very well may be. And I've heard it, especially go down to Miami, people recite it to me, won't go, rebound, Bosh, back out, down, and the whole thing. It was truly one of the most exciting, because it decided a championship.
Right.
He doesn't, God, the Spurs win the title, and Miami is not, they're not the champions that year. And the thing that everybody talks about was, and I remember this, the NBA was going to have the championship presentation on the court for the Spurs, and it looked like they were going to, so they had the rope out. They always had that rope around the court. So the rope was out, and I remember looking down at the Spurs bench, and they were jumping up and down, giddy. We're winning the championship. It was like, it was over. That game was over. The perfect storm for Miami had to happen. There had to be like 6 different things happen down the last 30 seconds of that game. And all 6 happened, and a number of them on that final play. So it's amazing, the fine line between winning and losing. And that's why it drives me crazy when people say, oh, he never won a championship, so he can't be considered one of the greats. Sometimes, one minor thing prevents a player from winning or losing a championship, and that one did. And, it was just, the other thing that I remember from that, Buster, is knowing Ray Allen, all the games I must have done, a couple of hundred games that Ray Allen played in for his various teams. And I get to the arena early. I never once beat him to the arena. Every Ray Allen I went to, and I'd go and get to the court, he's already out there shooting. And he was made and built for that moment, because that shot he took, I'm sure he took countless times that day before the game, and thousands of times throughout his career.
Wow. Now, do you ever have things where guys will come up to you after a game or well after and be like, that was a great call on that play of mine? Like, has LeBron ever come up to you, before or after a game and been like, I really like that call you did on that dunk of mine? Does that ever happen?
You don't get them come up sometimes. Sometimes they sent out a tweet on something like that. There was a bang call this year that LeBron liked, that he put out there, and that gives me credibility in my household with my kids when that stuff happens. So
I like, for sure.
But no, it's always, you feel this responsibility to get those calls right. And again, you don't always nail them. Sometimes you nail them perfectly. Sometimes you wish you could have done something a little better, and sometimes you don't do a great job on it. But you feel this responsibility to make the big events make the right call, because the players that put all the work and time into it deserve that, and the fans deserve it as well.
100%. All right, the next game I wanted to ask you about, OKC versus Golden State. Not a finals game, obviously, but Steph Curry, it's a half-court three. I feel like that might have been your most pronounced bang. That was a high gold medal level bang. What do you remember from that shot?
Well, I don't know why I did a double bang that night. That
was the double bang. That's double gold. Yeah.
It just came out, and that was a cumulative reaction, because that year the Warriors, they were on one of the most magical runs I've ever seen. At the time, they were like 54-6 or something like that. Just an incredible streak. And they were beating everybody and beating them badly. And now they face a really good Oklahoma City team, and they were getting their butts kicked for a while. And Curry was just a magician that year. He turned his ankle early in the game and had to leave the game.
Right.
Comes back. They're down double figures in the fourth quarter. Oklahoma City, that arena is a great arena. Place is going crazy. And you're thinking, okay, this great run is going to come to an end here this afternoon. And they figured out a way. They figured out a way to do it. It was like an out-of-body experience. I don't know why I screamed so loud, but as a fan, to watch them do that again and overcome adversity in one of the most hostile arenas in the league, that was a special comeback, and clearly a special shot.
And maybe we have gotten to the bottom of it, where the double bang is the highest honor you can receive from you.
I think I've only done it, 3 times. Luka Doncic last year in the playoffs, when he won a playoff game at the buzzer. And then there was another, Eric Gordon, of all people, got one once. It was a Houston Golden State game that was just one of those games back and forth. You have the same passion for basketball as I do. You just get caught up in the wave of emotion and the excitement, level of play. And even as an announcer, I have to keep a level head, but at the same time, the fan in me comes out. And sometimes the play is so surprising and so extraordinary that you got to let it go.
Totally. Last game I want to ask you about, the blocked by James game. The I don't know, I guess it must have been 7 in Cleveland Golden State. LeBron has never won a title in Cleveland. It's coming down to the wire. Looks like they're not going to get it done again. And that play happens. Were you at center court broadcasting that game? So did you see him coming, or was it you were focused on the ball, on Iguodala taking it down the other end, and then he just appeared out of the blue? What was your vantage point of that play?
Well, again, in that particular play, you really have to focus on Iguodala going up for the layup. And I think it was J.R. Smith who was right around him as well. So I'm not seeing LeBron race the whole way, but I see him come in at the end of the picture. And you still don't think, Iguodala is 6'8" and he's right at the rim. You think there's just no way. And if he hits that shot, game over, championship over. Again, it's like the Ray Allen shot. It made the difference between one team winning and one team not winning. And for him to make that play from how far he came, and to make sure it's not a goaltend and not foul, it's one of the iconic plays in the history of the league. And he had, because he has so much responsibility offensively, he doesn't play defense the way he did when he was younger, and he can't, and most players at his age can't. But he was always one of the smartest defenders, and he knew angles and he knew what he could do. And for him to have this great offensive machine in terms of scoring and assists, one of the greatest plays he's ever made, and the one that won him his championship in his beloved hometown, was on the defensive end. And it was incredible. That whole series, the way they came back from 3-1 down and gave a championship to a city that when you were in Cleveland, you could feel what it meant to those fans, how hungry they were and how desperate they were to get the championship. And here this hometown kid delivers it.
Amazing. Well, last question for you. What advice would you give to an up and coming broadcaster who maybe wants to do it on TV, or by the time they do it, it'll be VR? What advice would you give to a young up and coming broadcaster?
Well, I think the first thing is somehow find a way to get repetition, because like anything, when I started, I wasn't any good. And I just kept working at it and working at it. And, there are ways to do that even when you're in school. You just sit in front of a television and you call a game off a television, or you go to your local, if you're in high school, you go to your local high school. If you're in college, you go to your college and sit up in the rafters and call the game into a tape recorder. And just do it over and over again. And you're just going to get better. And if you don't get better, then you realize maybe it's not for you. But that's the way to get better, is by calling, repetition, and going back and listen to it and trying to get a feel for what you like and what you don't like. The other thing is preparation is the entire key to it all. Because if you're prepared and you know everything about the sport and the teams and the players that you're broadcasting, there's a comfort level when you sit down in that chair to call the game, because you've got all the information ready. There's nothing that's going to surprise you. You can just worry about calling the game. So those, to me, those are the two things that you really have to focus on when you're first starting. And I think it's also important to get somebody who's going to tell you the truth. Find somebody, whether it's a friend, whether it's a family member, whether it's somebody in the business, who will tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. You need somebody to tell you, okay, you do this well, but you got to get better at this. Because, my mother and father would hear me do a game when I was there. Oh, you did such a great job, son. And of course they're going to say that. They love their son.
Right.
But find somebody who's going to tell you the truth. And I was able to find some people, and even now to this day, I've got some people who I say, hey, listen to a game. Tell me what you're thinking. What do you like? What do you don't like? And some of them are in the business. Some of them are just friends who are fans at home who watch everything. And they've really helped me if I'm slipping up on something or something I need to get better on. And I think that's really important, to get somebody who's going to give you honest evaluation, the tough love, the tough coaching that's going to make you better.
That's great advice. And, I think it is true that people always say that basketball players want to be rappers and rappers want to be basketball players. But I think more and more, well, I know from my broadcasters wish they were the starting point guard of the Knicks. And oftentimes, to the dismay of some, but to the belief of me, a lot of those players want to be broadcasters too. And I think that's happening more and more. So it's funny how everything comes full circle, because you were talking about when, you might realize broadcasting is not for you. For me, when I realized basketball wasn't for me,
it's tough to come to that realization. Yeah, I was a professional baseball player when I was a little kid, and I learned that right away. And then basketball too. I learned that early, that I was not going to be in the NBA, but that was still, when you're young and just starting out, that's the ultimate goal. What would be better than being a professional athlete?
But it is also true that, being the great thing about broadcasting too is you can do it your entire life. There's no physical element of it. So you could do, like Vin Scully did. It's literal, the entire life. So I think broadcasting does have the edge on sports in that category.
It's a wonderful profession to be a part of. And, the reason I fell in love with basketball was the team aspect. I just loved the idea that you're working with four others on the court. And often if you work together as a team, you can beat another team that had more talent. The collection of talent was better, but they didn't play as well together. And that's why I fell in love with basketball. And broadcasting basketball is the same thing. It is such a team effort because not only do you have to work with your analyst and your sideline reporter, but the producer and the director and the camera people and the statistician and the graphics people and the video people. It's such a cool team effort that when it all comes together and you have one of those telecasts that you really feel that everybody nailed it, There's a great team camaraderie that comes off of that is still, it's still thrilling to this day after doing it so many years.
Especially you get to do Knicks games with Clyde. Clyde's been on the podcast as well. He's the best, just the coolest person in New York. I mean, to be able to do it with him for that long as well, I mean, it doesn't get any better.
I'm living a dream sitting next to that man.
Oh man, well, it has been a dream to have you on the podcast. So thank you so much for doing this. Everybody can find this man not through his burner Twitter account, but on every big game on MSG and everywhere he does the big games. So my friend Mike, thank you so much for doing this.
Hey, Buster, it was really fun. I enjoyed meeting you. Look forward to doing it again sometime, meeting you in person, and very, very thrilled and impressed by your success.
Thank you. All right, everybody. We'll see you next time. Peace. Awesome, man. That was